There was this terrible explosion. Big ball of flame.
And who stole parts of a secret Soviet submarine?
78 sailors vanished in 1972, and the world was told it was a battery fire. That was a lie. A state-of-the-art sonar scan just painted a three-dimensional picture of the incident site, and it changes everything. Beside the crushed hull of the B-37, there is a second, massive object. It has cylinders. It has right angles. It looks industrial. This discovery proves the sub was doing something illegal, something dangerous, and something that went terribly wrong. We are about to dive into the Cold War's darkest secret, the sonar betrayal. The ocean is usually a quiet place, but sometimes it screams at you. In 2025, the screens on the Norwegian research vessel Helmer Hansen lit up with a ghostly image from 3,000 meters down. They were scanning a desolate sector near the Svalbard archipelago, the frozen gateway to the polar north. The technology they were using was the Kongsberg EM-710. This is not the old-school green blip radar you see in movies. This is a system capable of slicing through the abyss with sound waves, painting a three-dimensional map of the mud and rock miles beneath the surface. The crew was looking for history, and they found it. The flat monotony of the ocean floor was broken by a large, rigid shape. As they dialed in the frequency to get a sharper resolution, the image became undeniable. It was long, cylindrical, and man-made.
Mapping the seabed outside the Golden Gate, they found a big target, a very big target. Was it a ship? Was it something more?
It was the B-37, a Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine that had vanished from the face of the Earth more than 50 years ago. Finding the wreck was a massive victory. It solved a mystery that had haunted naval historians for decades. But here is the catch. As the analysts zoomed out to map the surrounding debris field, the celebration stopped cold. About 500 meters, or roughly 1,600 feet away from the main wreckage, there was another return. It was a dense, clustered anomaly, and that is putting it lightly. In a typical shipwreck, debris scatters downstream, lighter pieces float away, heavy pieces drop straight down. But this object was heavy, compact, and sitting in a spot that defied the physics of a simple sinking. It looked like a collection of cylinders stacked or piled together. It looked organized. The atmosphere on the bridge shifted from excitement to total confusion. The Soviet Navy was famous for its secrecy, but they were also obsessed with record-keeping. There were no records of a second vessel being lost in this area in 1972. There were no records of an underwater structure or a dumping ground at these specific coordinates. So, here is the deal. We have a submarine that was officially listed as having suffered a non-combat loss due to a battery fire. That is the line Moscow gave the world. But a battery fire is a self-contained disaster. It does not explain a massive field of unidentified heavy machinery sitting a quarter-mile away. The Helmer Hansen could not send down a camera. The currents were too strong and the winter ice was creeping south. They had to rely on the acoustics, and the acoustics were telling a terrifying story. The main hull of the sub looked terrible. The bow was crushed, likely from impact. But that second anomaly? It didn't look like damage, it looked like cargo. This has ignited a firestorm of speculation among intelligence analysts. If that second cluster is cargo, what was a diesel-electric attack submarine carrying that was so heavy? Foxtrot submarines were hunters. They carried torpedoes and sailors. They were not cargo trucks, unless they were moving something they weren't supposed to. The timing of this discovery is critical. The Arctic is no longer just a frozen wasteland. It is a strategic chessboard. Russia and NATO are vying for control of the northern trade routes. Finding a war grave is sensitive. Finding one that might contain unauthorized technology is a diplomatic nightmare. The whispers from those who have seen the raw data suggest that the B-37 did not just suffer an accident. They suggest it was engaged in an operation that went horribly wrong, involving equipment that was never meant to exist. The ocean floor is a great preserver of secrets. It keeps things frozen in time. But now, that silence has been broken. The sonar pinged a warning that history is about to be rewritten. What the sonar found next challenges every official record we have: the Cold War trap. To understand why that second shape on the ocean floor is so baffling, we have to go back to the world the B-37 left behind. The year was 1972. The Cold War was in a strange phase. On the surface, politicians spoke of peace and cooling tensions, but underwater, the war was hotter than ever. The Soviet Navy was obsessed with one thing: American aircraft carriers. They viewed these massive floating air bases as the ultimate threat to the motherland. To counter them, the Soviets built hundreds of submarines. The workhorse of this fleet was the Project 641, known to NATO as the Foxtrot class. The B-37 was one of these beasts. It was a diesel-electric submarine. This means it had to run noisy diesel engines on the surface to charge its massive banks of lead-acid batteries. But once charged, it could dive deep and run on electric power. When running on batteries, a Foxtrot was incredibly quiet. It was a black hole in the water. But it had a weakness. It could only stay submerged for a few days before it had to come up for air. Captain Second Rank Viktor Kovalenko was the man in charge. He was an experienced commander, respected by his crew, and trusted by the Northern Fleet Command. His orders were sealed, but we now know the objective. He was to take his boat and 78 men from the base at Polyarny and head into the North Atlantic. His target was the USS Forrestal carrier battle group. The mission was simple, but dangerous. He was to track the Americans. He was to record their acoustic signatures, learn their formations, and practice how he would attack them if the order ever came. It was a game of chicken played with thousands of tons of steel. The B-37 was packed with sensors and torpedoes. It was also packed with young men, conscripts living in a steel tube that smelled of diesel, sweat, and cabbage. On April 10, 1972, the B-37 slipped out of its berth. The Barents Sea was clogged with ice floes, providing perfect cover for a submarine trying to break out into the open ocean without being detected by NATO listening posts. For the first 2 days, everything went according to plan. The sub checked in with headquarters using brief bursts of extremely low-frequency radio waves. These squawks were the heartbeat of the fleet. The last heartbeat came on April 12th. The sub reported its position near 71 degrees north. Captain Kovalenko reported heavy ice conditions, but stated that all systems were nominal. He was hunting. He was closing in on the shipping lanes where the NATO exercise was taking place. And then, the silence set in. It is not that simple, though. Submarines are meant to be silent. A missed check-in is not immediately a cause for panic. Atmospheric conditions can block radio waves. Equipment can glitch. A captain might decide to stay deep to avoid detection. So, for the first 24 hours, the Soviet command waited. They assumed Kovalenko was just being a good captain, staying quiet to stay safe. But by the second day, the silence became deafening. The Northern Fleet initiated Operation Sever, a massive search and rescue effort. They launched maritime patrol aircraft. They diverted other submarines to the area. They scoured 10,000 square kilometers of ocean. They listened for the distress pings of the emergency buoy. They listened for the sound of hull tapping. They heard nothing. This complete lack of surface debris is one of the reasons the new sonar discovery is so important. Usually, when a sub suffers a catastrophic explosion on the surface, things float. Life jackets, oil, insulation. Something always bubbles up. The fact that nothing was found suggests the B-37 went down deep, and it went down fast. The official story crumbled the moment they saw the scan. The forbidden transport. The crew of the B-37 were casualties of the technology of their time. The Foxtrot class was rugged, but it was cramped and dangerous. The batteries were located in the bottom of the hull. If seawater leaked onto the batteries, it would create chlorine gas, suffocating the crew in minutes. If the batteries were overcharged, they produced hydrogen gas, which is volatile. A single spark could turn the sub into a disaster. For decades, the battery explosion theory was the most logical answer. It fit the profile. It explained the sudden loss of contact. But the new data challenges this. A battery explosion blows the hull out, but it usually happens inside the pressure hull. It does not explain the something else found 500 meters away. The mission profile of the B-37 also contains a detail that was overlooked for years. Intelligence reports from the era mention that the sub was fitted with experimental signals intelligence gear. They were testing new ways to listen to American communications. This gear was heavy, power-hungry, and classified. Could the second anomaly be related to this equipment? Was the B-37 towing an external sensor array? Some Soviet subs were modified to tow long wire antennas or sonar sleds. If this sled snagged on a rock or malfunctioned, It could have acted like an anchor, dragging the sub down or causing it to stall in a dangerous maneuver. The silence of the B-37 was the first clue. It told the world that whatever happened, happened instantly. There was no time for a distress call, no time to blow the ballast tanks. 1 minute they were hunting, and the next, they were falling toward the bottom. But the silence hid the truth for 50 years. Now we have to look closer at the mystery that has everyone obsessed. The sonar scan from the Helmer Hansen is not just a picture, it is a density map. And the density of the object 500 meters away is telling us a story that contradicts the official records. Let's analyze the possibilities. The most boring answer is usually the right one, but in this case, the boring answers don't fit. Could it be a rock formation? Unlikely. The sonar resolution is high enough to distinguish between the jagged, random geometry of natural geology and the smooth, straight lines of artificial construction. This object has right angles and cylinders. Nature does not build in cylinders, so what is it? The first theory circulating among naval architects is that it is a sister component. When a submarine implodes, it breaks apart. The pressure hull collapses and the air inside is compressed until it triggers an explosion almost as powerful as TNT. This can shear the bow or the stern off. It is possible that the stern of the B-37 broke away and drifted. However, the hydrodynamics don't support this. At that depth, heavy sections of a submarine sink like stones. They land relatively close to each other. A separation of 500 meters implies that the two objects were separated while they were still moving, or one was jettisoned with force. This brings us to the cargo theory. The Foxtrot class was a torpedo boat. It carried 22 torpedoes. These were massive weapons, weighing 2 tons each. If the sub suffered a fire in the torpedo room, is it possible the captain ordered the torpedoes jettisoned? Standard procedure would be to fire them or dump them to remove the hazard, but a pile of torpedoes would scatter. They wouldn't sit in a neat cluster. The anomaly looks like a single large unit or several large units strapped together. This has led to a more controversial theory. The B-37 was carrying something on its deck. The sonar signatures bear a striking resemblance to the containers used for anti-submarine missiles. But again, the timeline is tight. The B-37 was an older boat. Fitting it with next-generation missiles would have required a refit that isn't in the logs. Then there is the something else that no one wants to talk about openly, the possibility of a second vessel. The anomaly is roughly 150 feet long. That is too small for a full-size combat submarine, but it is the perfect size for a midget submarine. The Soviets had a fleet of small spy subs used for sabotage. Was the B-37 a mothership? Was it towing a smaller spy sub? If they collided during separation, it would explain why both ended up on the bottom, separated by a short distance. But the wildest theory is yet to come. The final silence. We have to talk about the quackers. During the 70s and 80s, Soviet submarine crews in the Arctic frequently reported hearing strange rhythmic sounds on their sonar. They called them quackers because they sounded like a giant duck. These sounds moved at speeds of over 100 knots, faster than any submarine or torpedo existed then or now. They would circle the Soviet boats, sometimes for hours, and then vanish instantly. Could the B-37 have encountered one of these unidentified submersible objects? If the anomaly 500 meters away isn't a piece of the ship, but the thing that struck the ship, it changes everything. Imagine a scenario where the Soviet captain detects a fast-moving object. He thinks it is an American weapon. He maneuvers to evade. A collision occurs. The object, whatever it is disabled and sinks alongside the B-37. The debris field is metallic, dense, and unidentified. It fits the profile of a crashed vehicle. If the something else is actually the wreckage of a non-human craft, or perhaps an advanced secret American drone that was decades ahead of its time, it explains the absolute secrecy. Neither side would want to admit that they made contact with something they couldn't control. Then there is the theory of the cylinders. Some experts have pointed out they look dangerously like nuclear waste containers. The Soviets had a bad habit of dumping radioactive waste in the Kara and Barents Seas. It was a quick and dirty way to dispose of old reactor cores. Was the B-37 on a secret dumping mission disguised as a patrol? If they were carrying unstable waste containers on the deck and one leaked, it could have contaminated the crew or caused the accident. The anomaly sits there, mocking the official story. It is a lump of metal that represents a deviation from the truth. It proves that whatever the B-37 was doing, it was not just watching the weather. It was hauling something heavy, something secret, and something that ultimately dragged them down. The sonar has given us the what, but it hasn't given us the why. And the why is likely buried in the archives of the Kremlin, or perhaps inside that second cluster of debris. The evidence is mounting that this was not an accident. The B-37 is sitting upright. This is unusual for a chaotic sinking. It suggests the sub might have flooded slowly at first, or that it was controlled until the very end. But if they had control, why didn't they drop the emergency buoy? The fact that it was never found means either the crew was incapacitated instantly, or someone deliberately disabled the safety systems. The discovery of the B-37 solves one mystery but starts another. What do you think that second object on the sonar really is? Is it a secret weapon, a second vessel, or something even stranger? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and subscribe for more uncovered history.